Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video we're going to react to 13 things from the 1970s that kids today just won't understand. The 70s, man, must have been a cool time to be alive. Fashion was just so flamboyant, with the big collars, the platform shoes, the afros, the curls and stuff. It was a massive change from the 50s and the 60s where, it seemed that people dressed quite formally in suits and stuff like that. People wore suits a lot more than in subsequent decades. But I don't really know that much about the 70s. Obviously, I wasn't alive then. And, the technology, must have been so different. But what did people do on a day-to-day? Obviously they worked and etc. But how did they socialize? How did people just spend their free time? Nowadays, teenagers, they're often on, playing online games. That's a big consumer of people's time right now. But, games consoles were just kind of being released back then. So what were teenagers doing? Probably just out playing and stuff.
There are some things that are unique to the decade that we grew up in. The 1970s was no different, having a distinct style that is easily recognizable, even to newer generations.
The bowl cuts.
But aside from the obvious disco and bell-bottom trends, there were more minute details that people living during that time will easily recognize. So here are 13 things from the 1970s that kids today would never understand.
Let's go.
Options for watching TV were very different during the 1970s. For one, there were really only 3 TV channels plus public broadcasting.
Wow,
that's right,
just
three. No streaming services, no endless options. You'd also have to get up and manually turn the dial to change channels. It was a time in which we waited for our favorite shows, which included nightly shows that were popular and Saturday morning cartoons. It was a big deal when you could pour a big bowl of cereal and binge hours of your favorite animated shows. But with the limited options on the television, it's no wonder kids spent so much time outside. Well, that and the fact that some parents made their kids go outside and play.
Man, we need more of that today, honestly. Nothing against, obviously, video games. I play video games rarely, but I do enjoy it when I do. But yeah, kids need to get out more, honestly. Get out more, socialize more, get fitter. I see so many young kids these days that are overweight, massive change from when I was growing up. Kids need to get out and play more.
During the 70s, making a mixtape was an art form. It took patience and dedication to sit by the radio for hours, waiting for the right song to be played. It didn't matter how good your timing was either, because pushing down the play and record buttons at precisely the right time still sometimes had the DJ talking over the intro. And that was just part of the charm. Cassettes had their quirks too, like when they got tangled, and you would have to use a pencil to wind them back in. Cassettes made it pretty easy to create what we know today as a playlist, and this was the first time we could listen anywhere we wanted.
The boombox. Yeah, I remember I had a cassette, when I was 9 or 10. I think my mum bought me a Walkman, a Sony Walkman, and it had cassettes very briefly, and then CDs came in. This was 90s, maybe 98 or something, 99.
Did you ever run around the house and pretend you were Superman or Batman? Well, if you did during the 1970s, then you most likely had on a pair of superhero Underoos. For many kids, they served a dual purpose. They were underwear and part of a costume when you were strutting around the house, feeling invincible. Superhero Underoos were more than just clothing. They were your identity, especially the ones that matched the actual superhero outfits. Nowadays, kids can never appreciate their underwear in the same way.
Underoos.
Recollection Road is proud to partner with Life. During the 1970s, record stores were not just places to buy music. They were social gathering spots. Just like the mall of the 1980s, young people would hang out with friends, browse through vinyl records, and even listen to albums before they purchased them. Store employees at this time were also music enthusiasts, and they would recommend hidden gems. It also wasn't uncommon for you to strike up a conversation with a stranger who was into the same music as you. So the local record store was a special place, and yet another
Wow,
experience
people would meet
that is
there and
hard to
stuff.
replicate today.
Yeah, nowadays there aren't any record stores anymore, at least in like big chains. The last one was a place called HMV, but that shut like maybe 5 years ago. It's a real shame, man. I really like the idea of going and just listening to music and meeting random new people there. That'd be so cool.
Hitchhiking during the 1970s was surprisingly easy and acceptable. It was very common to see people thumbing a ride on the side of the road. Drivers would often not hesitate to pick up hitchhikers, and it was seen as a way to help out a fellow traveler. There was more of a sense of camaraderie on the open road back then, and that's hard to understand in today's world. But it wasn't without risk, and there was still a chance you might encounter a few weirdos, and that was just part of the fun. Nowadays, it's illegal to hitch free rides in many places, but back
Really?
then, it wasn't unusual to find a service member, a student, or even a hippie thumbing for a ride.
Wow, yeah, these days people would be too scared, with all the talk of, kidnappings and things like that. I think people would be, a bit too scared to do that. Largely for right reasons. There are a lot of people these days.
When you think back to the 1970s, men had some serious style. They had manly mustaches, sideburns, big hair, and that distinct aroma of aftershave wafting around them. It was all about the macho look, and men took their grooming pretty seriously. This was also coupled with some pretty bold choices in clothing too, and as long as you could leave a couple of buttons undone so you could show off your hairy chest, you were good to go.
He was in that movie Smokey and the Bandit, wasn't he? That was a great movie.
Nothing quite matches the swagger men had in the 1970s.
Yeah, cool fashion.
And speaking
to
of
be fair.
grooming, ladies too had their own unique products to give them that 1970s look. Sunin was all the rage, promising sun-kissed highlights. Women would spray it into their hair and head outside hoping for those perfect golden locks. And who doesn't remember the smell of Love's Baby Soft, a signature scent from the 1970s? The sweet, youthful fragrance was a defining smell that had all the girls wearing Baby Soft. But I'm not
Baby
sure the
Soft.
ad campaign would fly today.
Okay. Okay.
When the telephone that hung in the kitchen rang, it was always answered. This was before caller ID, so people had no idea who was calling. Can you imagine? You didn't know if it was your best friend or a sales call, which meant there was a chance that you might recognize the voice on the other end and spend some time getting twisted up in the phone cord while you talked. Or you might be yelling across the house to let someone else know the call was for them. Today's kids might find it unbelievable that we willingly picked up the phone without the slightest clue as to who was on the other end.
Wow, yeah. You'd be like, hello, who's this? It's so rare that, you have a conversation with someone you don't know who's on the other end of, unless it's like a no caller ID.
To best capture the moments in the 1970s, you absolutely needed a Polaroid camera. The idea of hitting the button and instantly getting a picture developed was gratifying, but you had to be selective because each roll of film only had a certain number of pictures. And then there was the practice of shaking the picture to help it develop faster, which was just a myth. But you couldn't take the bulky Polaroid camera with you everywhere, so there were also photo booths that were strategically placed where teenagers congregated. Places like arcades, malls, and roller rinks were ideal, so best friends and couples could capture the day with a series of goofy and fun pictures.
These are getting popular now, though. These are becoming more popular, like photo booths, old school big Polaroid cameras.
If you were to step back in time and visit a 1970s kitchen, you'd probably find a fair share of mushroom-themed decor. Mushroom plates, mushroom curtains, mushroom wallpaper.
Why,
They were
though?
everywhere. Everything back then seemed to have an earthy aesthetic, and mushrooms must have been the perfect fungus to represent that style. I guess you'd call it charm, and every corner of the room seemed to be inspired by it.
Why mushrooms, though? I mean, I like eating mushrooms, but yeah, interesting choice. These probably are worth like if you've got a set of these now, they're probably worth a pretty penny, though.
As you waited for the weekend and that special morning of cartoons, you also needed a sugary cereal to help you enjoy it. The 1970s was all about finding the best surprise toy inside the cereal box. Kids would beg their parents for a certain brand of cereal, not because of the taste, but because of the toy. It may have been a silly game or a small figurine, but it was like finding a treasure when you dug down to the bottom of the box and pulled out the prize. This excitement made morning cereal more than just breakfast, which is much different than today.
Yeah, they don't really do that anymore, do they? Like getting a toy in your cereal. Yeah.
Opening a beer or soda can in the 1970s was a bit different than what we are used to today. You'd pull the ring back and peel back the aluminum tab. And back then, most of the tabs were just tossed on the ground. These sharp pieces of discarded metal were a nuisance, especially on beaches or places where you might walk barefoot. These pull tabs were just another hazard that we faced, and the tops would change shortly after to the more familiar stay tab that we recognize today. But it was still all part of the fun of living in the 1970s.
Wow, 35 cents for a can of Coke. Yeah, times have changed, huh? Nowadays, it's like £1.50.
Last but not least, school lunch in the 1970s wasn't complete without a trusty metal lunchbox and the matching thermos. These lunchboxes not only showed off our favorite characters from pop culture, but they often also had their fair share of rust on them too. Any ding or scratch would quickly rust over, and our parents didn't seem to mind either. Remember the smell of opening a metal lunchbox after a long, hot day? Kids today, with their ice packs and insulated lunch bags, will never fully understand what it was like to grow up in the 1970s.
What did it smell like? What did it smell like when you opened one up? Like, did it still smell of the food? Curious.
Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and make sure to sign up for the Recollection Road newsletter using the link in the description.
Man, I feel so nostalgic.
Recollection Road is all about looking back on our past, and many of these memories begin with our family. Your loved ones have lived a life.
Man, it's so strange. Like, I feel nostalgic, even though I wasn't alive in the 70s. I didn't experience anything on this list. Or actually, no, I experienced the cassettes. But yeah, I don't know. When it comes to the past, there's always a feeling of nostalgia, even though being alive back then would have had its challenges for sure, you know. But it just always feels like the past was such a great time, you know. Things were so much simpler, you know. There wasn't as much polarization. Maybe there was, you know. But yeah, like, let me know, like, do you guys have positive memories from the 70s? Like, let me know what some personal experiences, if you feel like sharing. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoy my videos, please help me out by liking and subscribing.